Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. So today I'm going to be talking about the Botvinnik variation of the Semi-Slav. Now this was based on a request by YouTube commenter a few days ago, and originally I wasn't planning to make a video on the Botvinnik because first off, that's what I play, and the intricacies and like everything that I've learned, it comes with experience, and I think that people are also like, not a lot of people are interested in learning the variations, so I figured that it would be kind of a useless video, but apparently someone is interested, and so I'm gonna make this video in between my research on the Moran, because currently my research on the Moran is not finished. I'm still researching the modern Moran, so in the meantime I'm gonna make this video talking about the Botvinnik. And so before going into the variations, I just want to talk about my situation. If you're a regular viewer of my channel, then you may notice that the background has changed, and that's because I moved to Australia for 1 year. I'm taking a course in Melbourne, so if you are from Melbourne, then do hit me up. So yeah, we're just gonna jump right into the main position of the Semi-Slav in this position. And bishop g5 is definitely is the sharpest of options, and the most theoretically testing, I would say, because black has many options in this position. Black can go for the two sharp variations. The first one is the sharp Moscow after h6, and then obviously like bishop f6 is no problem, just queen f6, and that gives up the bishop pair. But the testing line is after bishop h4, taking on c4, e4, g5, bishop g3, and b5, where there are some serious structural problems with black's position here, because playing both b5 and then g5 here are subject to be hit with h4 and as well as a4. So this is looks interesting, and theoretically I think black is fine here. So if you want to learn the Moscow, then by all means do so. However, personally I'm a Botvinnik player. I'm only a Botvinnik player. I've played the calmer knight bd7 and then entering the Cambridge Springs with queen a5, but I found that it's not my cup of tea, especially after the move, I think cd5 and then like rook c1 if I'm not mistaken. I think that's the line that I'm kind of afraid of. So yeah, and here after dxc4 we enter the Botvinnik variation, and the most testing line is for sure to play the move e4, but we will also discuss other sidelines. If you compare this position with, like, for example, playing the developing bishop f4, you notice that bishop f4 is a far inferior move, because after we take on c4, b5 is going to come next, and playing a move like e4 right now, b5 doesn't do anything because there's no pressure on this knight, which is why bishop g5 is a much better move than bishop f4. And so yeah, going into this chapter, I'm going to be discussing a few of the sidelines here. First off, e3 is probably a move that you'll see in the lower levels, because people think that you can just play like this e3 move against the Slav, like the classical Slav, as well as the Semi-Slav. However, in this position you cannot, because the inclusion of the move e6 means that this bishop is already open to possibly pinning the knight on c3 here. So for example, after b5, black is just up a pawn, and let's say a4, bishop e4, a nice move that's possible because in the Semi-Slav e6 is already included, and this a4 move already weakens the b4 square. So after bishop e2, knight bd7, which defends the knight against any possible doubling of the pawns, castles, and queen b6, which is a typical idea here to maintain the pawn structure, and the position is very nice. I don't think bishop c3 is necessary, but maybe at some point in the future. At least here black can continue with like bishop e7, castles, possibly a5 also. And so this is a very good position, just up a pawn. And so here there's another move a4, which is very interesting, and it's and from this position there are actually two moves that I think are quite playable. The crazy looking b5, which gives back the pawn, or the move bishop e4. If you're looking for a safer option, then possibly bishop e4 is better. And the line goes after e4, just taking on c3, and then playing queen a5 with pressure on c3. And so bishop f6, queen takes c3 would be already a bad situation for white. And so here e5 is a testing line. And after knight e4, putting pressure on the bishop and on c3. There are two moves here. You can check the PG on, I'm going to upload about rook c1, but the main line goes like bishop d2, and then playing c5 here. And essentially after breaking with this move, black is fine. Let's say bishop c4, knight takes d2, queen d2 and cd4. And here, let's say cd4, knight c6, bishop e5, just pinning the knight. And then bishop d7, not allowing white to damage the pawn structure. And then rook c1, queen d2, king d2 and a6, bishop d3 and king e7, where there's a lot of play left in the position. And this game was seen between Jeffrey Strong against Anton Smirnov in 2019 in the Junior Speed Chess Championships. And the position is fine. It's very equal, I think. Yeah. So this position is okay. I don't want to go too much detail into these variations because I've tried that before and it's like a lot. It's way too much theory. So you can check the PGN as I mentioned before, if you want to look at all the variations. And how about this b5 move? This leads actually to very crazy play. It has been tried by Shirov, Shigurov, and like Grandmaster Saturapman as well. And at this position, it's possible to play e4, but I think after queen b6, the extra pawn here is worth more than the fact that black's pawns are doubled on the f-file. Let's say after bishop e2, bishop e7, d5 is the most testing line, and here knight cd5 first, ed5, and then rook g8 is a way to pose problems on the g2 pawn. And if the g2 pawn falls, then it's gonna also lead to disaster on f2. So let's say knight d4 and then knight d7, which is a thematic idea in this line, just to like accept the weak e6 pawn here, but the knight is coming to d7 where it can jump to e5 and possibly defend the c4 pawn. And here I found that both captures with the knight are quite bad. After knight c takes b5, there's bishop b4 check, which misplaces the king. Meanwhile, knight d takes b5 allows rook takes g2, taking the pawn and threatening checkmate on f2. And after rook f1, bishop c5, there's a lot of pressure here, and essentially the pawn is going to drop and black is going to be much better. And meanwhile here a5 is the best line, but still after queen c5, de6, we have this nice move knight e5. And the reason that I want to show you this line is that there's a very nice exchange sacrifice here. After ef7, king f7, and bishop h5, there's this really nice move that we need to play because king g7 runs into knight e6, and king e7 looks very dubious because knight f5 possibly. So here rook g6 is a very nice move. It's a brilliant exchange sacrifice which banks on the fact that the knight is coming to d3 and there's already pressure on g2 right now. So yeah, best here is just to castle, and after rook d8, putting pressure on the knight, bishop g6, hg6, a6, trying to misplace the bishop on a8, knight c takes b5 and queen d5. This is actually already winning for black because g2 is threatened with mate, f3 is forced because knight f3. I think there's a line that possibly that black can go for here after knight f3. Okay, I think I've reached the move limit here on the Licha studies, which is 3000 moves. But essentially knight f3 here I think loses to knight f3, queen f3, queen takes b5, and knight f3, gf3. There's at least like queen g5 winning the queen, or at least there is, yeah, at queen g5 immediately just king h1, rook takes d1, and f3 is also threatened with mate. So that's already winning. Essentially this line is very good for black. This e4 move is not very challenging. And so a takes b5 here is a critical test. And the reason that I discuss this variation is that I've faced this twice, actually no, 3 times against a few of my friends. And after c takes b5, bishop f6 here is no problem. I mean, the line just goes this, queen b6, typical idea, taking the pawn, knight c6, and then bishop b4, where queen d2 is actually a mistake here because it's vulnerable to this knight a5 to b3 plan. And so after this sequence, let's say, for example, if the bishop was to come to a2, then bishop a6 would be already unpleasant, preventing white from castling. And so bishop b5, king d8, castles, and knight b3 wins in exchange. And so instead of queen d2, queen c2 is better. But after we trade off the queens and rook b8, black is actually tactically defending against bishop takes c4 on account of bishop c3, rook c3, and rook b1, which would win the rook in the corner. And so here best is from bishop e2, but there's a nice break with e5. And this opens up the bishop, and all lines here favor black. For example, let's say castles, we can play bishop f5, e4, knight takes d4, knight d4, ed4, knight d5, knight d3, bishop d3, c d3, rook c4. And it looks like white is going to restore material equality. But after this sequence of bishop e6, rook b4, knight b4, king e7, turns out knight takes d3 is not good, because bishop c4 would actually trade off a lot of pieces, like rook d1 and the rook d8. And after all the pieces come off the board, this passed a pawn, this outside passed a pawn would be very strong and would be just winning for black. So this line is no good with bishop f6. And instead of that, knight takes b5. It's definitely more natural just to take the pawn here. And the idea is to play queen b6 and ask the knight where it's going. And here, I faced knight a3 against my friend twice, and I didn't manage to find the correct continuation here. The correct continuation is just to take on a3. And obviously rook takes a3, queen takes b2 is pretty good for black. And here the main test is queen a4, which wins the bishop back, but takes control of this long diagonal after knight c6, queen a3. In the meantime, it looks like black is prevented from castling, but there's a lot of counterplay left in the position, especially after knight e4. And I found here that e3 looks initially quite dangerous, because because the computer already recommends to play the move like f6 here, which would weaken the e6 pawn tremendously. But turns out that black's activity here is actually quite immense, especially relating to the move knight b4, and then possibly defending the c4 pawn with bishop a6. So the line goes f6 here, and we're following a game by Martirosyan against Seturatman, and after bishop f4, knight b4 turns out to be really strong, with a massive threat on c2 here. And after rook c1, bishop a6, so as I mentioned before, just defending the pawn. Bishop c7 was played, and then queen c7, queen b4, rook b8, queen a4, bishop b5, and the game continued queen e3 and the king f7, where black is actually fine there. I mean, okay, the king doesn't look very unsafe on f7 actually, because the e5 and g5 skirts are covered, and the knight on e4 actually prevents any counterplay with possibly pushing the pawn to e4. The bishop also has to come to e2 instead of the ideal d3, which is pretty nice, and I think black is no worse here. So this line, I think, with knight a3 is interesting, trying to win back the pawn, and it's quite tricky, but I think black is fine. And knight c3 is also a line here, which leads to unclear position here after queen takes b2, bishop d2, knight d5, takes 6, rook b1, queen a3, e4, which is a typical idea, try to break up the pawns, and then bishop d6 here, where e takes d5 I don't think is any problem after this sequence. e8, knight d7 here, and I think this is already dynamically balanced. The computer says this is about equal, but I think there's a lot of interesting play left to be had in the position. Meanwhile, after rook b5, this has been played twice. This leads to really unclear play after rook takes d5, and bishop a6 is the engine move, with quite an unclear position, to be honest. This looks strategically dangerous due to the like the white central pawns, but still the position is balanced due to the c4 pawn staying alive. Possibly can be pushed to c3 also. And here, instead of that, c3 is also a possible option, which leads to, I mean, the position is still equal, but it's at least a different kind of play. It was played once by Alexander Shabalov in 1995. So you can definitely look at this line as well. It's quite interesting. So my verdict is that if you want to play this crazy gambit with b5, trying to get some play on the b2 pawn, then you can try to do that. But if you want to just play it equal and get a fine position, just play bishop b4. So yeah, that covers this kind of rare a4 line, but I think it's very interesting to discuss it. And so we're going to cover e4 here. And what I'm going to do in this video is try to talk about like the main variations, which comes after b5. And okay, bishop e2 is not a very good move, because it just yeah, it's not very challenging here. And essentially I found after h6, okay, bishop f6 is like no problem, bishop e4, and then here something like this is already good for black up a pawn. And the best move is bishop h4, but still after this sequence, initially I got this position in a blitz game once, which piqued my interest, because this looks like after the exchange on e7, knight e4, that the knight is coming to d6, and white has a lot of compensation. But it turns out that after castles, knight d6 and a5, the fact that the bishop is not on b7, it hasn't wasted a tempo. It means that white taking the bishop on c8 is just a bad decision. Meanwhile, black can continue with moves like a4 or play like knight d7 and break with f6 in the center, which leads to very good position. So I think that covers this line with bishop e2. There's also this move a4, but we can just play queen b6 here, and bishop f6 leads to very similar situation here, where we're just going to be up a pawn. And we see this typical idea of after responding against d5 with knight d7, and let's say knight d4 and knight d5 would actually get a pretty good position here, because f4 would be met with knight d3, which would dislodge the queen's defense over the knight, and which would actually just win the knight on the spot. Meanwhile, a move like, I think, d takes e6 leads to long castle with the pin on the knight, just winning for black. So that's a very good position. And instead of bishop f6 here, bishop e2, still, I think that after this sequence, we can just be up a pawn. b4 here takes, knight b5, bishop c5, castles. And in this position, after bishop b7, knight d4, queen b6, a5, queen c7, the position is very dynamic, I think. But the fact that black has two bishops means that they're definitely not worse. I mean, the two bishops are extremely strong at this diagonal, and the rooks also have possible open files to use. So this is quite a decent position to get. Yeah, you possibly don't need to remember all of the lines, but just know the thematic ideas of like responding against d5 with thinking about the possible captures, but also thinking about ignoring it and just playing knight d7. But here the main line is to play e5, and this is where the bulk of theory is, and a lot of theoretical discussion has been had here. After h6, because we don't want to lose the knight. Obviously bishop f6 is no problem, like gf6, and if you try to play in like typical g3 fashion, which happens in the Botvinnik, then after f5 black is already much better up a pawn. Meanwhile, like ef6, knight d7, bishop e2, bishop e7, and like this sequence is obviously fine for black, just up a pawn, and d4 is exceptionally weak. So bishop f6 is no problem. Bishop h4 here, and after this sequence g5, there's this knight takes g5 move, and this is where the main theory occurs. Other sidelines like bishop g3 and e takes f6, which is quite an aggressive option, involving like taking here, then knight e5, trying to involve like g3, bishop g2 possibly, and trying to immediately gain pressure over the c6 pawn, is interesting but not very challenging, I think. Maybe like the older generation of theoreticians may try this move, but it's not really challenging. And knight takes g5 here, h takes g5 is the only move, and after bishop takes g5, knight bd7. Here we reach like a critical point where white has two options to play for. Either playing like the move order with g3, and then playing like e takes f6 later after bishop e7, bishop g2 and queen b6, or playing in this position after knight bd7 to play e takes f6 first. And personally, I think that playing g3 first is better, because there's no immediate necessity of taking the knight. And so the difference is that with g3 immediately, white does not spend a tempo on taking on f6, and after bishop b7, bishop g2, there's no immediate c5 move, which would force the main line of the Botvinnik after like c5 and then d5, right? After queen b6 takes and then castles, and then this will transpose to the Botvinnik. However, there are some additional options that black has relating to this g3 move, like for example rook g8, which has been played from time to time, but this is known not to be a good move after the move h4. And in this line, after knight d5, black is up material, but still after g6 the position gets really unclear, and white definitely has the more comfortable end of this dynamic equality, which is why I think it's more of a practical value that with g3, what is saying that the rook g8 is a possibility. You can try it, but I'm very happy to get into this after h4, and so this is more of a practical benefit rather than an objective one, because after bishop b7, bishop g2, queen b6, we will enter the main line here after c5. It's important to note that in here it's important not to play c5, because I have played from time to time here, and I thought that after d5 this would actually transpose to the main line. However, it turns out there's a d takes c5 move, and the fact that the knight coming to c5 now means that black cannot castle long, and this is a serious problem because the king is actually very vulnerable on e8 here and can be hit to like moves like a4, and b5 is getting undermined severely. So this is a very bad position already, which is why it's important not to play c5 too early. Just castle first and then play c5. And from this move order of an early g3, the line will continue castles, and then after c5, d5, and then after this position, black will play b4 and enter the main line. From this main position of the Botvinnik, we need to push b4 here to kick the knight. And here there are a couple of very interesting options. Very rare are the moves rook e1, which I faced once in a blitz game, which is why I've researched this. And I think this is quite an interesting surprise weapon that sacrifices the knight on c3 but puts additional pressure on the e6 pawn. And it's very interesting, I think. You can check the PGN also. And d takes e6 is also very interesting. It's very rare, but great. It's very important if you want to look at it theoretically, because I don't think it's worse for white than any of the lines with like rook b1 or knight e4, which are by far the two main moves. Let's talk about rook b1 first. And here, I think that the only line playable is to play the move queen a6. And the nice thing to know is that against both the knight a4 lines, so against both knight a4 and the rook b1 lines, queen a6 I think is the best move, which is an easy way to remember things. After queen a6, here b3 is not very good because we can take on c3, bc4, ed5, bishop d5 taking here, where it's important to note that white is threatening bishop f4 here, and the queen a8, which would be unstoppable, or like, and then like some threats of like rook b8, some of those ideas. And so it's important here to trade off the bishops with bishop h6. After rook fc1, king c7 is a very important, and it's a very sharp position, so we need to play this. Rook takes c3, queen c6, trading off the queens here, and a piece is a piece, and the f6 pawn is going to fall, and black is already a lot better. So this b3 move, as long as you know some of the critical responses, then you should be fine. D takes e6 is by far the main move, and here it's important to note why the you can compare later to see why the d takes e6 move works in the rook b1 line, but it does not work in the knight a4 line. And I will show you also a game later played between myself and a couple of strong players in blitz. So here after the line goes bishop g2, e7, and here bishop takes f1 is the only move. If you want to look at the refutation, for example, like bishop a8 here, you can look at the annotations. Bishop takes f1, and here the line goes like king f1 and the bishop e7 here. F takes e7, rook d to g8, knight e4, and the line goes c3. And here I've like looked at other moves, but king g1 is by far the main move. And here we have a nice rook takes g5 move, which at first glance looks quite crazy, like where's the tactic? But the point is that after knight takes g5 and queen g6, there is a threat of c2, forking the pieces, and also the knight. And here queen f1 is quite possible, but there's c2, and I think black is fine there. Meanwhile, b takes c3 is the main move, and after queen takes g5, here queen e2 is best. C takes b4, look like queen e7, bc5, and queen e4. Black is very safe, and I will actually show a position where I will actually show a game where I have this position later. And after queen e2, which is best, we play queen e5, very important. After queen a6, king b8, the line goes c takes b4, and rook takes b4 is nothing because knight b6, and the line is like fine, I think, for black here. Dynamically, it's equal, and the computer says it's like slightly better for white, but if you look at all of these slightly better positions after like a long sequence, it will balance out, and I think black is fine here. And this is like this imbalance with like getting a knight against this outside past h pawn is a typical situation you'll see, and unfortunately, if you're not happy with it, then you're gonna have to change openings and not go for the Botvinnik. But that's something that you need to be ready for. And I found here that queen a3, which is not a novelty, so I apologize for the annotation. And I thought that this was like very good, very promising for white. Um, trying to capture on b4 with the queen actually. But after queen z5, queen b4 takes, king c7, rook f4. A few correspondence games have continued, f6, and basically the line goes after like rook e4, and then like rook e8 preventing promotion, obviously, rook e6, knight e5, and then giving the f6 pawn for the e7 pawn. And okay, white has like 3 pawns for the piece, but it's not going to be winning or anything, so I think black is theoretically fine there. And you can check correspondence game in the mega database if you want to find more about that. So this line I think is fine, and this is like the critical line of the rook b1 line. And all of these moves are very, very forcing. And in this position after bishop takes f1, there's also a line here with queen d5, which leads to a very spectacular draw if you know what you're doing, and if white knows what they're doing. The line goes bishop takes e7. If you want to look for a more fighting way, which is still objectively drawn, you go for rook e8, where e takes f8 is a big blunder because of this sequence, rook e5 here, and where actually I think the queen is trapped. Yeah, it is trapped. So this is not good. And so e takes f8 is generally wrong, and knight e4 here, bishop h6, and then knight d6, king c7, taking here, rook takes, and the bishop h3, and turns out there's after like bishop f4 and the king b6, g4 is the only move turns out in this position to avoid the possibility of like queen b7 and like this threat on g2. Because, for example, queen takes f7 will lead to queen b7 with unstoppable mate on g2. Meanwhile, like g4 and queen a4 is like the only move, but it reaches a very complex position where still queen takes f7, queen c6 would be winning for black, so that can be played. And it's very imbalanced, but still, the fact that white has to find this g4 move in this unfamiliar position gives black some hope to play for the win. Like, yeah, there's a trick here essentially. And the line that actually instead of like rook e8, the spectacular draw that I was talking about occurs after bishop takes e7, fe7, and then bishop d3, where I think e takes d8 leads to basically the same thing, knight e4, and then take on b1, knight d3, and then a bishop f4. Essentially we get this draw, which is very funny. And if not for e takes d8 queen, knight e4 also leads to this spectacular draw that I've just mentioned. And this is best just to go for this draw. So that's the forcing line that I want to talk about. And after b4 and then knight e4 here, we're going to move on to the next move, which is the most common move actually. I think that queen a6 is the best move. I think queen b5 is playable, but the line of theory is not that clear. Meanwhile, after queen a6, it's a lot easier to remember first off, because against both rook b1 and against knight e4, you play queen a6. And secondly, I think the lines are more clear in terms of like the themes, and it's not as unclear as the queen b5 line. And here best is a3, and after bishop takes d5, bishop takes d5, we have this knight e5 move, and this wins the bishop on d5 and puts a lot of pressure on the f3 square, where possibly the knight can jump in, or also like on d3. And knight takes c5 here is a very interesting line that may shock some people, because like after bishop takes c5, I mean, it looks like white is going to be down 2 pieces after rook takes d5, but the idea is after queen e2, ed5, queen e5, and b3. And now we reach actually a very nice position where the pawn chain looks very pleasant. And let's see, after this line, king b7, black is completely fine here. Possibly like rook d7 is going to come, or like, yeah, I mean, maybe keeping the rook on h8 to maintain this pawn, to control this pawn on the h file is fine. And I think black is no worse here. Meanwhile, a takes b4, bishop takes f2 is an important desperado, where rook takes f2, rook d5, and then this line can occur where black is fine, and the knight on d3 is actually very nice. the f6 pawn is also going to fall possibly, and there's a threat on the rook on f2, so this line is also fine. Meanwhile, the main line goes a takes b4, after rook takes d5, queen e2, cb4, knight c3. White actually wins the exchange here, and in this position, it's important to play the move queen d6. From the white side, I've seen some people play queen c6, but it turns out that the move bishop f4 just gives white a big advantage, because the thing is that after queen d6, bishop f4 here doesn't work because the c3 knight is hanging. Meanwhile, in the knight c3, queen c6, bishop f4, if you take here, then after bishop takes e5, the knight doesn't have enough support, unlike when the queen is on d6, meaning that this bishop f4 move is possible, and the subsequent exchange of like minor pieces on c3 and e5 favors white a lot, because because the bishop on e5 is a lot more active, right? So best here is to play queen d6, and now playing a move like rook a7 is interesting. It leads to a draw with best play, bc3 here, and then king c8, rook f1, knight c6, and this is enough for the draw, I think. Meanwhile, knight takes d5 is the main, is what most games follow. And after queen d5, threatening knight f3, which would be devastating. F3, knight d3, bishop e3, and bishop c5. Black's composition is enough in this position to gain equality at least. Rook a6 tries to put pressure on the possibly on the a pawn after trading off the bishops. But after this line, threatening here, knight takes f3, and in this 4 sequence, black is managing to get a draw here. And it's quite a crazy line, as you see that many forced draws are possible, but you shouldn't be too discouraged by this, because okay, maybe very strong players are gonna know all this theory, but based on my experience, very rarely do my games in the Botvinnik variation end in a draw. So that's a very nice point. And instead of rook a6 here, bishop takes c5 is possible, but after this sequence, king h1, queen d4, here d3, here queen takes here, and queen f3, and this leads to a perpetual. Pretty spectacular one, actually. But still, let's draw. And so we see crazy imbalance. White is up like a rook in an exchange, and it's still a draw. So this shows kind of like the crazy possibilities in the Botvinnik variation. And actually, that's pretty much all I want to talk about in the theory section. It's not going to be complete because if I talk about every single line that I've researched in this variation, then I could make like a three-hour lecture at least, or three-hour video, sorry. 3-hour video on this variation. Okay, so what I want to do now is that I want to show you 11 games of mine from the black side, playing the Botvinnik variation. And I want to ask you to stop. I'm gonna pause the video. I'm gonna ask you to pause the video, and try to think about what the best move in the critical position. So all of these games are from the Botvinnik variation. So you should accustom yourself to, if you're not very familiar with this variation, to get used to these moves. c5, d5, castles. Okay, rook e1. Now this is the move that I actually didn't discuss in the theory section, which is a very interesting weapon. At least in the Leech's database, it's only been played once, and I've faced this once in Blitz, as I mentioned before, which is why I researched this. And best here is to play bishop takes d5, bishop takes d5, and here I played a horrible blunder, which is knight b6, which after this I'm completely lost, and my opponent found the best move, knight b6, a b6, and then rook e6, which is just completely crushing for white. I mean completely crushing for black. But I want to ask you to find in this position what is the best move. Okay, so the best move is actually e takes d5 in this position, and there is this very interesting sacrifice with queen takes d5, sacrificing the knight, and I think the line goes something like this, and it was like queen c6, queen f7, I think like bishop d6. It was something like this where objectively this is equal, but the fact that the knight can possibly come to e5 and come to f3, and first off, like the king is going to secure itself on b8, possibly knight e5, knight f3 is going to come, and this looks quite dangerous if white isn't accurate here. So that's the theoretical importance of rook e1, which is not very common. The next game I play against IMJackRodgers, who is a very prominent adjusted com player, and I've played him many times in the Botvinnik variation. G3, so this G3 line I think is the most accurate. Bishop e7, bishop g2. Okay, d takes e6 here. So we know that d6 e6 is very, very rare, because typically white plays rook b1 and then d takes e6, like rook b1, queen e6, and d takes e6, as I mentioned in the theory. But here d takes e6, and I think this line is fine for black, and fine for white also. But in this position, best after bishop takes g2 is to play the thematic e7, and after this typical sequence, queen e6, taking here, the position is very imbalanced, and it's something that Botvinnik players should be happy to go for. But here, a blunder that a lot of people actually make here is king takes g2, which after queen takes e6 is just completely lost, because there's already the immediate threat of queen h3 here. And let's see the engine here after h4, which is best. Yeah, b takes e3 just wins a piece here. So best here, I mean, knight d5 was played, and that just ran into like this sequence. Nice sequence here. And this wasn't the best by me, but it's still good enough with the checkmate on the board. So next game we're going to look at, I played all of these games on chess.com, and we're just going to enter the Botvinnik once more. So here, after in this position, I think it's possible here to play d takes c5. It's very interesting after what happens after bishop takes c5, which leads to a different kind of play. And also knight takes c5 here, I don't think it's very good, because it transposes to the variation where basically black cannot castle queenside here, which is unfortunate, and something that black definitely wants to do to safeguard the king. So here, anyways, we enter the main line of the Botvinnik after c5, d5, castles, and then a4 here was played. And here, this is not a good move, because we have b4 here, and a5 was played. And here it's very nice that we need to play the move queen a6 here, which stops the a-pawn from running up the board. And knight e4 here was played, but after e takes d5, bishop takes d5, knight e5, bishop takes b7, queen b7, white loses because the rook is hanging and the queen is also hanging. So this shows kind of like the, if white is not prepared and they just play some random like move like a4, if we can punish it, then we're gonna be like winning here in this position. The next game we're gonna look at, we're just gonna go to the Botvinnik again. Something I want to mention is that the computer, when you go, for example, to Elite Chess, considers, like the computer analysis, considers g takes e4 a bad move, an inaccuracy actually, but don't mind it because this is the wrong evaluation. After e4, b5, bishop e2 was played, and here I've mentioned that bishop e7, castles, h6, and after bishop h4, this actually possibly transposes to, I mean, this is possibly just up a pawn after castles. Let's see, e5, knight d5. This is already very good. Like, let's say bishop e7, queen e7, knight e4. I think similar to the line that I mentioned before, a5 here is quite strong with knight d7 and, like, for example, knight d6, knight d7, and possible f6 to come, or a4. So this line is quite good for black. But here bishop f6, gf6 I played. Best here was just to take back with the bishop and no nonsense. This sequence, yeah, given by the computer, and this seems to be pretty good for black because c5 is possibly going to break after maybe moving the queen to c7 or a5 even. I think a5 is quite active, and that position is fine. But in this position, I play gf6, which is not a very good move. After a4, which gains some counterplay, and so I do suggest you or warn you to be careful when you try to take back with the g-pawn, because it may not be the best move. The next game we're gonna look at, so we have like seven more games. I'm just gonna skip right into the main position. e6, e7. So now we finally reached the the main position of the Botvinnik, and queen d5 here. And here, as I mentioned in the theory section, that bishop takes e7 is the line that leads us to the spectacular draw, and rook e8 is possibly the most testing line. Obviously, it's still drawn, but it's the most testing line in terms of practical value. And bishop takes e7, f e7, rook d8. And here, my opponent, okay, knight e4 is best here. And I think, let me try to figure out what's happening here. I think bishop d3, right? Yeah, I think bishop d3 is like the line that I mentioned before. Bishop f4, something like this, if I'm not mistaken. No, I think this is already losing, so I'm already forgetting my theory, actually. Yeah, okay, so I think I made a mistake here. Instead of rook d8, yeah, I should have played like a bishop d3. And this goes to the line of theory that I mentioned. And then here, bishop takes b1, knight d6, and then this one, right? Bishop f4, king b6, and then we go to the spectacular draw. Yeah, so that's the draw. And this is why, like, yeah, even as a person who plays the Botvinnik, like, religiously, I still make a lot of these mistakes. Rook d8 is just a bad move. And so definitely just play bishop d3 here. Okay, so the next game here, let's just jump right into the main position. Just skip all of these moves. 6. Okay, so here bishop takes d5, and we know that in this line, the main line goes that white sacrifices the exchange, right? Or sorry, rather black sacrifices the exchange in order to gain a knight on e5 and the queen on d5 eventually. So we follow this line, knight e5, queen e2, rook takes d5 here, and so after queen d6, knight takes d5, queen d5. Here f3 is by far the best move, and we can respond with bishop c5, and then jumping with the knight to d3, and we know that. But here f4 was played, and this already shows like a significant error after bishop c5. We just weakens the diagonals, forcing rook f2, and after knight d3, my opponent just resigned here on the spot, which shows like people can make a lot of errors in this, yeah, in the Botvinnik variation. Or possibly that was a mouse slip, I'm not too sure. The next game, is bishop e2. And here, I want to ask you what to do in this position. Because I didn't actually cover bishop e2 in this variation. I covered bishop e2 when white took on f6 early on and then played bishop e2. So this is kind of an exercise to ask you what to play in this position. Yeah, okay, so hopefully you pause the video and you've already thought about it. I think that first I'm gonna turn on the engine here just to make sure that I'm not wrong. Okay, you can see that the engine recommends queen c7 here, but I think if you want to transpose to our line of theory, then we should just play bishop e7. And then we can enter this line through knight f6, bishop f3, and the bishop e7, where I think knight takes d5 is a really bad move. Yeah, because of queen a5, and both pieces hang here on this rank. So this is not good, and essentially this position is fine with the knight eventually coming on d5. I can show you a line possibly like knight e5, takes, and taking me back. The e pawn I think is correct, or okay, cd. Yeah, okay, this position looks very healthy actually, with the queenside pawn mass being quite nice, a5 coming. And so in this position, yeah, bishop e7, and just don't go fancy and like, sorry, I actually activated Siri by accident, but yeah. Yeah, essentially don't try to be fancy with like queen b6 if you don't know in this position. Is that queen b6 even necessary? I'm not sure, because in the bishop e2 line, we normally want to capture on f6 back with the knight and then have the queen there supporting the capture. So that's my suggestion. The next game is a game I had against a GM on chess.com, a GM rookoco. And so, yeah, typical Botvinnik stuff. D takes e6. Now, this is the moment where I wanna show you that even a strong player manages to mess up the theory. Where I said before that in the rook b1 line, d takes e6 is possible. However, in the knight a4 line, d takes e6 is not possible. And the reason is that after bishop takes g2, e7, this looks similar to the rook b1 line. However, this is the knight a4 line. The difference is that we have this move queen c6, which is extremely strong, and the problem is that like there's some possibilities like bishop h3. The knight on a4 is being there's some enormous pressure. Bishop takes f1 is being threatened, and this position is already actually lost for white. The line goes e takes d8 rook, king d8, and then here f3 was played, and then after just taking here, king takes f1 is better, but still I think after just rook takes h2 is completely busted, as we see here. Meanwhile, queen takes f1 is played, but that just hangs. That first off just hangs the knight. Let's see. Yeah, that first off just hangs the knight. But knowing, after getting a lot of experience in the Botvinnik, I've realized that this knight e5 move is very, very strong. And first off, it threatens knight takes f3, which should be crushing with a mating attack to come. And it's very difficult to defend here. Black actually has, white has no defense here. Rook d1, king c8, king g2 is played. But after knight f3, queen takes f3, rook takes h2 would be just winning. And so in this position, my opponent resigned. So this is a very nice game as well. Just showing that you always consider knight e5 instead of like taking the free knight here, which should possibly give some counterplay to white. The next game I'm gonna look at is a game where I lost against a cheater actually, which shows the reason that one of the move order problem here. Playing queen b6, castles on the c5 here. Okay, maybe it's not a move order problem, but I think that there's an additional option here actually that white has, which is the move d takes c5, and you need to play really accurately in this position. I didn't manage to play accurately, and I actually managed to lose because this position is considered equal, but after queen e2, bishop g2, king g2, I actually played knight d3 here, which is not very good. If you look at the PGN file, I think bishop h6 is better than like h4, bishop g5 takes, b4, knight e4, queen c6, and this position at the very end is equal. So yeah, I played knight d3 here, and the problem is that after knight e4, bishop h6, white just manages to like get a grip on this position on the bishop on g5, and the position is very unpleasant. If you look at the computer, it already considers it a lot better for white, and I just continue the game here, and it's really instructive to show how the engine just crushes this position. Queen d5, and then like yeah, this is dead lost essentially. And that's the risk of playing the Botvinnik if you mess up the move order or something like that. So you need to be very, very sharp. Yeah, the next game we're gonna look at e6, c5. Okay, e6. Now we get this typical exchange sacrifice, right? Now, so we know that knight c3 is the main move, and here rook fc1 is played. And here, it's actually I didn't mention this in the theory section, but if you look at the PGN file, it's there. In this position, it's very important to play the move instead of queen c6, which I played, which is horrible on account of bishop f4. Noting that the problem is that the queen and the king are lined up in this position. So best here is to play the move queen b5. And I think this position is fine after bishop f4 and yeah, bishop h6. And the key point in this position is that the bishop on h6 pins the bishop, meaning that this knight cannot be dislodged because the rook is going to hang. And so with the knight still planted firmly on e5, this position is very balanced, and black is able to maintain the balance here. And queen c6 I played, and then like this, rook c2 is not good. Like rook c4 was just winning here. And here, rook c1, making use of the pin. Very nice. The pin on the knight. And so that's just, just don't make my mistake, and just instead of lining up the king and the queen on the c file, just play queen b5, stepping away from any of those problems. And so the last game that I'm going to look at is a game between myself and a German grandmaster with the handle of Karpov's Maid. I played this like just I think last week or something like that, and this was I think essentially a perfect game. Bishop b7, 4 rook b1, queen e6, takes, e7, takes. Now here, so now we see the line that I just talked about. And c takes before here is played. And here, as I mentioned before, queen e7 takes, and then queen e4. And I managed to find this without exactly remembering the theory, but I looked at this position and I'm like, okay, I mean, like, I covered the c6 square, possible knight e5, knight f3 is being supported. This position doesn't look bad, right? And my opponent here played queen b3, king c7, and then they played the move queen b5 here. And I'm just going to show you the rest of this game. I evaluated that like queen a5 is coming, so I can't do anything about that. If I play a move like queen c6, queen a5 is still coming, and then queen takes a7, and then I just probably lose. So here I played knight e5, and I'm ready to sacrifice the a7 pawn after this sequence. And queen a5, king d7, I'm ready to run my king up the board to f5, and there are actually no checks available. Rook d1, king e6, and a king f5 is fine. And this game continued queen a7, king e6, queen e6, and king f5, where knight f3 is a major threat. Like, it's a massive, deadly threat. And the rook on b1 is also hanging, so rook b3, knight f3, and I win the exchange here. And with a few accurate moves here, c6, I play queen e1 check, which I think is important to force the king to g2, because if I exchange the queens off the board, then I'm going to be winning. The reason that I force the king up to g2 is that if I play queen e5 now, there may be queen d3, and like this is a possible repetition, which I don't want to allow, which is why I give the check first. And now after queen e6, now queen d3, queen e4 would just be winning for black, just trading off the pieces. And so queen c5 here, and eventually I stop the pawn, I round back the pawn, and my opponent blundered the queen. So yeah, and here my opponent just resigned, and this was like a game with no inaccuracies, I think, from my end, which I'm very proud of. So yeah, that essentially covers my coverage of the Botvinnik variation. I hope the theory section, as well as the sample or these sample games, kind of showed what you can expect from the Botvinnik variation, and hopefully encourage you to play the Botvinnik variation yourself. Personally, I played like in blitz all the time. It's my main weapon because I'm ready to enter a theory battle with my opponent. And if you're also a player with that sort of mindset, you want to challenge your opponent on their memory and their theory, then you can also play the Botvinnik. And I hope you do. So that's going to be from me. Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you want to request any other future videos, then please do in the comment section below. Thank you so much for watching. That's all from me. Please stay safe and have fun playing chess, everyone. Bye-bye.